So welcome everybody to this latest video on 162 Maths, and in this video we'll be continuing with functions with a focus on finding inverse functions. Now, inverse in maths means reverse operation. So for example, the inverse of addition is subtraction, the inverse of division is multiplying, the inverse of squaring is square rooting, and vice versa. Now, if a function is starting with the input and goes towards the output, then an inverse function will be going the opposite, which would be starting with the output and going to the input. So for example, if we have a look at a relatively basic function, so let's just say that f of x, and let's just go for times 2 plus 5, then its inverse function will basically do the opposite in the opposite order. So here, rather than starting with this one and then going to this one, here we're going to start with 2 and do the opposite, which is minus 5, and then we move on to 1, which is divide by 2. So it's kind of effective going in this route but doing the opposite. Now, in terms of at high level, you may get asked to find the inverse function. Now, it's important that you do understand the notation. So if a function is called f of x, which is the original function which goes from the input to the output, then its inverse function, which is kind of represented with f, and it's like to the power of minus 1, even though it's not classed as that, it's basically the inverse of x, and that represents the inverse function which starts at the output and goes towards the input. Now, the thing that you do need to note is that both use x as a variable, so don't see x as the input value because obviously, or the initial value, because obviously it's used in both values. So as you can see, we've got f of x and we've got an inverse function of x there. Now, in terms of the method of finding the inverse function of x, now although this method isn't really set in stone, I would say it's a really good indicator and a good start of getting the 3 possible marks for working this out. Now, if none of these steps make any sense, do not worry. When we go through some examples, hopefully it will do, but I'll be referring to these 3 steps when we're actually trying to find the inverse function. So the first thing you want to do is make f of x equal to y. Then you rearrange to make x a subject in terms of y, and then the last step is to replace x with the inverse function of x, or that sort of notation. So let me just put that in sort of inverted commas, and replace y with x, because your inverse function, even though it's going the opposite direction, is still going to involve x. So the best way to make sense of those steps is to actually work through some examples. Now, in each of these questions, we've been given the function and we need to work out what the inverse function is. Now, the letters do change in terms of what the name of the function is and what letter we're substituting in. But again, that's all covered in the previous video and doesn't really have an impact on the final answer. So looking at question 1, and I'm going to start by just writing out the function, which is 3x minus 6. So the first step is we replace f of x with y, like so. And then what we want to do is make x a subject or solve this for x. So here I'm going to end up with y plus 6 equals 3x, and then y plus 6 all divided by 3 equals x. And then all I then need to do in the final step is then replace x with f of x, or inverse function of x, and replace the y with x. And this here is my final answer. Then with question 2, so let me just color code this. So question 2, again, I've got g of t equals t squared minus 3. So again, I make it equal to y. Letter's not really important, it's just a technique. And then we make t the subject this time, so we've got y plus 3 equals t squared, and I've got plus or minus y plus 3 equals t. And then in terms of the final answer, I've got, it's going to be g of inverse g, I should say, inverse g of t equals plus minus the square root of y plus 3. Then looking at question 3, so again, I write down the function, so I've got c of d equals 3d minus 3, and then replacing the cd with y, and that's all divided by 7, I've got the 7. And then if I then make d the subject, so I've got 7y equals 3d minus 3, 7y plus 3 equals 3d. and 7y plus 3 all divided by 3 equals d, and then just do the substitution. So here I've got c to the power of minus 1, or inverse of c, d equals 7d plus 3 over 3. Then moving on to question 4, so let me just delete all of this. And let's have a look at question 4. So question 4, we've got y of x equals the square root of 3x plus 1. So I've got y equals and then root of 3x plus 1. There I've got y squared equals 3x plus 1. Y squared minus 1 equals 3x. So y squared minus 1 over 3 equals x. So then my inverse function, so y minus 1x equals x squared minus 1 over 3. And then moving on to question 5, and let me just get rid of, stick a little 5 there, and that never happened. And then with number 5, we've got a double-sided equation. So here I've got f of x equals x plus 3 over 4 minus x. So I've got y equals x plus 3 over 4 minus x. Now I'm going to put the denominator in brackets. So then what I then get is y, and then 4 minus x equals x plus 3. Expand the brackets out, I get 4y minus yx equals x plus 3. And we're then going to take this 4y over to this side and the x over to this side. Well, actually I'm going to do the opposite because I want to try and keep x positive. So let's then put all our x's on one side. So I'm going to take this over to that side and the 3 over to this side, in which I end up with 4y minus 3 equals x plus xy. And then I factorize the left hand side, the right hand side. So I get 4y minus 3 equals x 1 minus 1 plus y. And then I take this bracket over to the side. So I get 4y minus 3 over 1 plus y equals x. Then if I then, again it's really bad and really messy, here I've then got the inverse function of x equals 4x minus 3 over, and then it's 1 plus x, and there is my final answer. So now let's have a look at another question that you could get. So here it says that if f of x equals 3t plus 6, find the inverse function of 2. So here what you want to do first is find the inverse function, and then step 2 is then sub x equals 2 into the inverse function. So here f of x equals 3t plus 6. So y equals 3t plus 6, y minus 6 equals 3t, y minus 6 over 3 equals t. So therefore the inverse function of x is going to be x minus 6 over 3. Then I then substitute x equals 2 into this. So here I've got 2 minus 6 divided by 3, so that's minus 4 over 3, and there is my final answer. And then finally with question 6, it says if f of x equals 3x plus 2, solve the inverse function x equals f of x. So here what I'm going to do first is find the inverse function. So again here I've got f of x equals 3x plus 2. So y equals 3x plus 2. So then y minus 2 equals 3x. Y minus 2 over 3 equals x. So therefore the inverse function of x equals x minus 2 over 3. Now from this, what I then want to do is make these two things I've put in boxes equal to each other. So if f of x equals the inverse function of x, which I know is written the other way around in the question, but it's both the same. So here what I've got is I've got x minus 2 over 3 equals 3x plus 2. So if I take the 3 over to the other side, remembering that I've got to multiply everything by 3, I get x minus 2 equals 3 lots of 3x plus 2. X minus 2 equals 9x plus 6. Then take the x over to the side, so end up with minus 2 equals 8x plus 6. Then take the 6 over, minus 8 equals 8x, so x equals minus 1. And there is my final answer. Now we'll put a worksheet in the description below for you to test your understanding of everything we've covered in this video. It may also include things we've covered in the previous video as well, but hopefully it all makes sense and you get these questions right.